There is a whisper that visits, often in the quiet between tasks. It doesn't arrive with a shout, but as a soft focus memory, the scent of rain on hot pavement, the specific weight of a childhood. Blanket the uncomplicated silence of a summer afternoon long since past. This is not merely nostalgia, it is a deep psychic tug, a longing for a version of the past that feels simpler, authentic, more whole. It is a daydream for a life with fewer choices and clearer meanings. Quiet ache for a time when the world seemed to have sharper edges and a softer heart. This desire is a ghost limb, reaching for a reality that may never have existed in the way it is. Remembered, and yet its pull is one of the most powerful and underestimated forces shaping the present. It begins not with a thought, but with a sensation, a tightness behind the eyes that has nothing to do with sleep, a low, persistent hum in the bones, like the vibration of a train. On a distant track, the body registers the tempo long before the mind can name it. The phone lights up on the kitchen counter, a soft blue pulse in the periphery, then another and another, each one a tiny hook catching on the fabric of a thought. It apart before it can fully form. The intention was to simply make coffee, but now the thread is lost, tangled in a dozen different directions. The to-do list on the refrigerator door seems to mock the very concept of completion. It is a living document, regenerating in the dark. This is the ecosystem of the present, a state of perpetual arrival. The next email, the next headline, the next notification, the next update. The world is a river of information, and you are standing in the current trying to catch the water with your hands. There is no malice in it, only momentum, a silent, frantic percussion that has replaced the rhythm of sunrise and sunset. The overwhelm is not dramatic, it does not announce itself with panic. It is a quiet leaching, a slow drain on the reservoir of attention. The most intimate form of energy is pulled in 100 directions before you have chosen one. You scroll through a feed, curated lives, a blur of achievements and sunsets, and the unspoken question forms. The silence, how are they keeping up? And in the space between one ping and the next, a different signal breaks through. It is not a sound, but a feeling, a sudden, vivid memory of the weight of a corded telephone. The deliberate act of walking across a room to answer it, the singular focus of a conversation without a screen in your hand. The memory is not a narrative, it is an atmosphere, a quality of light. This is the first whisper of the longing. It is the mind's rebellion against the fracture. When the present feels like a room with too many open doors, the past appears as a corridor with only one. The memory offers a world of fewer choices, a world where things had weight and presence and could not be vanished with a swipe. It is the ghost of slowness, visiting a life that has forgotten how to be slow, the memory of a Saturday morning with nothing but the comics page and the sound of a lawnmower. Somewhere down the street, the feeling of being bored, truly bored, and the creative silence that would eventually bloom from that emptiness. The modern world abhors it. Vacuum fills every second with stimulus, but the soul, it seems, needs empty space to breathe. This ache is not really for the past, not yet. It is an ache for a different pace, a protest against the tyranny of the urgent. The body remembers a different rhythm, one set by the walk to school, the turning of a paper page, the wait for a photograph to be developed. It remembers a time when attention was not a resource to be mined, but a state of being to be inhabited. So the mind, in its search for shelter, reaches for the closest, softest memory of quiet. It is not an accurate historical record, it is an emotional refuge, a sanctuary built from the feeling of a simpler time, a time before the hum, a time before the stream, a time when you were not a node in a network, but a person in a room, and the world was not at your fingertips, but just outside your window, waiting to be discovered. The desire begins here in the quiet exhaustion of acceleration. It is the first faint signal from a self that feels stretched thin, reaching for a memory of density, of substance, of ground. The memory is not a photograph, it is a renovation, a quiet, constant project of the mind undertaken in the subconscious. The past is not a fixed place you can visit, but a material you are always shaping, smoothing rough edges, filling in cracks with the grout of later understanding, applying a fresh coat of meaning to faded events. It begins with a scent, perhaps the faint, sweet and dust smell of a grandmother's attic, or the sharp, clean scent of pine needles after rain. The olfactory bulb, the part of the brain that processes smell, is a direct neighbor to the hippocampus, the seat of memory. There are no detours. A scent does not ask permission to conjure a world, it simply builds one around you. The memory arrives not as a story, but as a landscape, a feeling of being small and safe and surrounded by mysteries in cardboard boxes. This is the raw material, the unedited footage of a life, but the mind is not an archivist. It is a curator and a storyteller. It takes these sensory fragments, the warmth of a wool blanket, the taste of a specific brand of lemonade, the sound of a particular song on a car radio, and it begins its work. It sews these fragments together into a narrative quilt. The patches are not arranged chronologically, but emotionally. A joyful afternoon from age 7 can sit right next to a peaceful moment from age 15 because they share the same emotional color. The process is one of gentle erosion and deliberate emphasis. The brain in its efficiency sandpapers the sharp, painful details off of otherwise happy memories. The long, tedious car ride to the beach fades into a blur. The sunburn is forgotten. What remains is the crystalline image of the wave, the cold shock of the water, the weightlessness. The argument that happened later that evening is filed away in a different, darker cabinet. The happy memory is allowed to exist in its purified form. This is how the architecture takes shape. The mind builds a house from the past, but it uses only the best bricks, the sturdy, sun-warmed bricks of security, the smooth, cool bricks of belonging. It leaves out the rotten wood of anxiety, the broken glass of disappointment. The finished structure feels solid, real, but it is a museum, not a home. It is a collection of highlights presented without context. You walk through its rooms and feel a profound sense of peace, because the chaos has been carefully edited out. Nostalgia is the emotion that fuels this construction. It is not merely remembrance, it is an active, bittersweet ache for the edited version. The word itself comes from the Greek nostos, meaning homecoming, and algos, meaning pain, a painful homecoming. But the home you are returning to is one you never actually lived in. It is an ideal composite, a beautiful fiction. The brain's reward system is complicit in this. Remembering a positively framed past can trigger the release of dopamine, the same chemical associated with pleasure and reward. The mind is, quite literally, chemically rewarded for building this sanctuary. It becomes a place you can visit for a small hit of comfort, a feeling of coherence in a present that often feels fragmented. The sound of a crackling vinyl record is not inherently more beautiful than the flawless stream of a digital file, but the mind makes it so. The slight pops and hisses are woven into the narrative. They become proof of authenticity, proof of a time when music was a physical thing with a history of its own. The imperfections are curated into the art. They become part of the story the mind wants to tell about a more tangible, more real world. This is the architecture of longing, a palace built from sensory fragments and emotional truths designed by the mind to be a refuge from the complexities of the present. It is not a lie, it is a coping mechanism of profound elegance, a testament to the mind's need to find or to create a place where the world makes sense, where the heart feels light, and where the path forward seems to have once been clear. You are not remembering a time, you are visiting a monument the mind has built to the idea of simplicity itself. The modern world presents itself as a cathedral of freedom. Aisles stretch into distance, endless and gleaming. Screens offer portals to every conceivable reality. Promise is self-evident, more is better. More options mean more control, more paths to a personally tailored happiness. But the psyche often experiences this abundance not as liberation, but as a quiet, paralyzing siege. It begins in the mundane, standing before a wall of toothpastes, whitening, tartar, control, sensitivity relief, all natural, with baking soda, with charcoal for gum health, for fresh breath. A simple daily act becomes a minor referendum on personal health and Identity, the mental energy required to choose, the slight, almost imperceptible friction of decision-making is expended before the day has even properly begun. This is decision fatigue, the slow draining of the will's reservoir through 1,000 tiny leaks. This phenomenon extends far beyond consumer goods. It is the architecture of a life. Career is no longer a path one enters, but a labyrinth one must constantly navigate with new corridors and dead ends appearing overnight. Relationships are not bound by tradition, but are perpetual negotiations of terms and boundaries. Even identity itself has become a project, a curated performance, a choice between 1,000 possible selves. Presented on social media, the freedom to be anything carries the hidden, immense weight of the fear of being nothing, or worse, of being the wrong thing. This is the tyranny, the oppressive weight of unlimited potential, the existential dizziness that comes from staring into an open future. The psychologist Barry Schwartz called it the paradox of choice. Rather than creating satisfaction, an overabundance of options leads to anxiety, regret, and a nagging sense of missed opportunity. With every path chosen, 1,000 others are closed off. The chosen path is then shadowed by the ghosts of its alternatives. The phantom lives, that whisper of what might have been. And it is here, in this state of cognitive overwhelm, that the idealized past reveals one of its most potent seductions, the gift of constraint. The remembered world often feels simpler, not because it was easier, but because its boundaries were more clearly defined. Social roles were more rigid, life trajectories more scripted. You were a baker, a farmer, teacher. You lived in the town you were born in. You married a neighbor. The number of life-altering choices was finite and often made for you by circumstance, tradition, or family. This is not a genuine wish for the limitations themselves, but a longing for the psychological relief they provided. A predefined path, for all its lack of freedom, offers profound freedom from the anxiety of choosing. The mind, exhausted from its role as perpetual architect of its own existence, looks back with a kind of envy at a time when the blueprint seemed already drawn. The desire is for a world with fewer branches, where the self could be discovered within a given structure rather than constructed from an infinite and bewildering set of possibilities. The romanticized past becomes a world of clear signposts, while the present feels like an open field with no compass, the memory of a time when a person's word was their bond, when a handshake sealed a deal, is not just a memory of greater trust, but of simpler social calculus. There were fewer variables, less need for prenuptial agreements, complex contracts, and digital verification. The rules, however unfair they might have been, were at least known. This yearning is a form of cognitive homesickness. The mind is homesick for a framework, for a narrative with a coherent plot, not a choose-your-own-adventure novel with infinite branching endings. The hidden desire for a simpler past is, in large part, desire for a respite from the exhausting work of constant self-creation. It is the soul's plea for a season where the question, who do I want to be, is replaced, even for a moment, by the simpler, more grounded certainty of here I am. A conflict begins to stir. It is a quiet one, waged not with shouts but with sighs. It lives in the space between the warm, golden glow of the memory and the cool, hard light of the present. The longing for the past, once a comforting refuge, now reveals its sharper edges. It becomes a ghost in the machine of the present self, a beautiful but disruptive spirit. There is the bittersweet pain of remembrance. It is a specific type of ache, one that is almost pleasurable in its intensity. Listening to a song from a specific summer, the one that seemed to last forever. The feeling is so vivid, so textured, the heat on the skin, the taste of cheap ice cream, the feeling of invincibility that only youth can provide. But the pleasure is cut with the precise, surgical knowledge that it is gone, truly, irrevocably gone. The very beauty of the memory becomes the source of its pain. This is the ghost's first whisper, a reminder of loss. Then comes the guilt, a subtle, nagging sense of betrayal. To linger too long in the warmth of yesterday can feel like a neglect of today. The unpaid bills on the counter, the work deadline, the complex needs of a modern relationship, they all wait in the Present demanding attention, the ghost of the past can become an escape hatch. Place to flee when the responsibilities of the now feel too heavy, and with that escape comes a quiet self-reproach. Is this longing a gentle wisdom, or is it a cowardly retreat? The mind begins to police its own nostalgia. A tug-of-war emerges. On one side, the sentimental attachment to a story that feels true. In the heart, the story of a time when life was more authentic, when connections were deeper, when the world made more sense. It is a story written in the language of failing. And it is persuasive. On the other side, the rational understanding that this story is, at best, a curated exhibit. The intellect intervenes, listing the facts. The past was not all porch swings and fireflies. It was also hardship, limitation, and injustices that the gold filter of memory conveniently softens. This is the core of the resistance, the struggle between the heart's truth and the mind's facts. The heart knows it felt safer then. The mind knows that safety was an illusion, contingent on a child's ignorance of the world's complexities. The heart yearns for the simplicity of a single shared story in a community. The mind counters with the freedoms won by breaking out of those very confines. You find yourself caught between two valid but opposing forces, one emotional, one intellectual, and to fully side with either feels like a betrayal of a part of yourself. The ghost can become a critic. It stands in the corner of a crowded, modern party, observing the interactions. It murmurs about how conversations used to be deeper, less performative. It scoffs at the sight of everyone on their phones, comparing it to a memory of a family gathered around a single radio, sharing a unified experience. This critical voice uses the idealized past as a weapon against the imperfect present, making it harder to find genuine joy in what is. The past becomes not just a sanctuary, but a standard that the present can never hope to meet. And beneath it all lies the most profound fear, the fear of being an anachronism, a living relic in one's own life, the terror that this longing is a sign of an inability to cope, to adapt, to evolve, that by holding too tightly to the ghost of what was, you are becoming a ghost yourself in the world that is. You are haunting your own life present, in body but with your spirit tethered to a different time. This is the silent internal conflict. It is the recognition that the very thing that once offered comfort now poses a subtle threat. The ghost is not malevolent, it is simply out of place. It carries a message, a feeling, a quality of light, but it cannot live in the present without causing a certain dissonance. The work is not to exorcise the ghost, but to understand why it has come, to listen to its message without allowing it to take up permanent residence, to acknowledge the ache without letting it define the entire melody of a life that is still, stubbornly, being composed in the present tense. A shift occurs. It is not a loud epiphany, but a quiet dawning, a realization that the longing itself is not the enemy. It is not a symptom of failure, but a message, a signal. Flare sent up from the depths of the self, indicating a need that is going unmet in the landscape of the present. The yearning for a simpler past is not a command to go backward, but a compass pointing toward what the soul requires to feel whole, right. No, the ghost was not trying to pull you into a tomb, but to hand you a blueprint. It speaks of slowness, and so you notice its absence in the frantic pace of your days. It speaks of tangible connection, and you see the digital substitutes for what they are. It speaks of quiet, and you become aware of the constant, low-grade noise that fills your mental space. The desire is not for the specific objects of the past, the rotary phone, the handwritten letter, but for the human experiences they facilitated, depth over breadth, presence over distraction, meaning over efficiency. This is the turning point, the moment the gaze shifts from the idealized then to the actionable now. The question transforms. It is no longer, why was the past so much better, but what quality of life so abundant in my memory is currently starving in my present. The past becomes a catalog of feelings, a reference library for the soul's native language. The warmth of the grandmother's kitchen was not about the linoleum floor. It was about the feeling of unconditional acceptance, the ritual of a shared meal, the absence of rush. The mind begins to hunt for the essence, not the artifact. It looks for ways to translate the wisdom of the memory into the grammar of contemporary life. The answer is not to reject technology, but to build sanctuaries within it, to designate hours for the phone, to be silent, to carve out an evening for a meal shared face-to-face with devices in another room, to relearn the almost lost art of doing one thing at a time, completely. To walk without a podcast, to cook without a video guide, to be bored and to witness what grows from that fertile silence. This is the process of listening to the longing without being enslaved by it. It is the difference between living in a museum and taking an art class. One is a passive observation of a finished beauty. The other is an active, messy, and creative process of generating that beauty for oneself. The goal is to harvest the feeling, not the form. To cultivate slowness, not to acquire antiques. The past, understood this way, becomes a teacher, not a warden. Its value is not as a destination, but as a source of raw materials for building a more conscious present. Memory of that quiet, focused afternoon becomes permission to block out a Sunday for rest without guilt. The memory of the neighborhood children playing freely until the streetlights came on becomes an inspiration to prioritize unstructured time over another scheduled activity. The ache for a simpler past is, at its core, a deep and intelligent homesickness for the fundamental components of a human life: agency over one's time, a sense of belonging to a community, work that is visible and meaningful, and a relationship with the natural world. The modern world, for all its miracles, has eroded these pillars. The longing is the soul's immune response, alerting you to the erosion. So you begin the quiet work of integration. You plant a herb in a pot on a balcony, not to be a farmer, but to reconnect with the slow, patient rhythm of growth. You write a letter by hand, not to abandon email, but to reclaim the intimacy of a thought formed slowly without a backspace key. You turn off the notifications, not to disappear, but to reappear to yourself. You are not recreating the past, you are rescuing its essential qualities from the stream of time and weaving them back into the fabric of your now. The anchor is not thrown backward, but downward into the present moment, seeking solid ground in a world that feels increasingly virtual, accelerated, and abstract. The final stage is not an arrival, but a settling, a change in the quality of the air. Ghost is no longer a disruptive spirit, but a quiet companion, the longing for a simpler past does not vanish. It is simply stripped of its urgency and its power to cause pain. It becomes a familiar tune one can hum without being swept away by its melancholy. It is a soft internal weather. This is the art of befriending the ache, to no longer see it as a flaw in one's ability to be present, but as a fundamental, even beautiful, strand of human consciousness. It is the mind's way of touching its own timeline, of feeling the connection between who it was and who it has become. The yearning is integrated when it is allowed to exist without demanding a return ticket. It is listened to, respected, and then gently released back into the stream of memory, its message received. The past, once arrival to the present, becomes its partner. It functions as a deep well of symbolic resources. When the modern world feels too thin, too digital, too fast, one can mentally reach into that well and draw up the feeling of solidity from the weight of a stone, the patience from the image of a slowly setting sun, the connection from the memory of a shared silence. These are not escapes, they are touchstones. They calibrate the nervous system, reminding it of a different, more ancient rhythm. A new understanding solidifies. The goal was never to live in the past. The goal was to make the present feel more like a home, to build a life in the now that is rich with the very qualities the past so poignantly symbolizes: authenticity, depth, slowness, and mining. The integrated yearning becomes a kind of internal compass, its needle always quivering toward what truly matters. It guides decisions not out of fear of the new, but out of a commitment to preserving the essential. This looks like a quiet curation of a life. It is choosing the quieter street over the busy highway, not out of a rejection of progress, but as a claim on peace. It is cooking a meal From scratch, not out of necessity, but as an act of tangible creation in an increasingly abstract world. It is the conscious preservation of an unscheduled afternoon, defending its emptiness as fiercely as a scheduled meeting. These are not acts of nostalgia, they are acts of sovereignty, declarations of what a human life needs to feel human. The romanticized past loses its power as a fantasy and gains its power as a teacher. Its value is no longer in its historical accuracy, but in its emotional truth. It taught you that you need moments of unproductive wonder. It taught you that you crave rituals that anchor the year. It taught you that your spirit requires silence as much as it requires stimulation. You stop trying to recreate the set of the memory and instead focus on directing the play of your current life with the same thematic depth. There is a softening, the internal conflict between the sentimental heart and the rational mind finds a truce. The heart is allowed its beautiful golden-hued memories. The mind is allowed its clear-eyed factual corrections. They no longer fight for dominance. They coexist, acknowledging that both are true in their own realms, the truth of feeling and the truth of fact. The integrated self can hold the bittersweet beauty of a perfected memory while simultaneously knowing it is a beautiful fiction. And so the hidden desire is hidden no more. It is brought into the light of conscious understanding. It is recognized as a timeless human response to the relentless pressure of change. It is the part of the self that is, quite simply, homesick for the eternal present, for a state of being fully immersed in a moment, unburdened by the weight of a fractured attention or the anxiety of infinite choice. The past was simply the place where you last felt that feeling consistently. The longing, once a siren's call to a rocky shore, becomes a gentle, guiding star. It does not pull you backward, but illuminates a path forward, a path toward a life that consciously makes room for slowness, for substance, for the quiet joy of an unrest conversation, for the deep peace of a mind at rest in its own moment. The journey ends, not in a different time, but in a different relationship with the time you are in. The past is finally put to rest, not by being forgotten, but by being fully understood. Its work is done. It has delivered you, wiser and more whole, to the profound possibilities of your now.